Hey y'all, I'm Lindsey. I have received a ton of questions about my low carb bread. I'd like to share that recipe with you today. Back whenever the Trim Healthy Table Cookbook came out, there was a bread recipe in the book that became a huge sensation in the Trim Healthy Mama world. I have shared in the previous food prep videos how I've made that in order to make it work for me, but I could never ever make it in a bread pan or a loaf style pan without having it spill over the edges or having it turn out soggy in the middle and burnt on the outside. I know tons of people have been able to make this recipe flawlessly time after time. For me, I struggled tremendously. I made a lot of modifications with how I baked that exact recipe. I did it in 9 by 13 inch pans. I did a lot of finagling with it to try to get it to look the way that it looks in the book. I was never successful. I set out to modify it to the point where I could be happy with the way the bread turned out. I have basically come up with a different recipe that was absolutely inspired by Trim Healthy Mama's wonderful white blender bread, but it has become a whole different animal. A couple of things. Down below, I will put all of the specific ingredients that I have used that I've gotten off of Amazon or wherever so that you can see those ingredients specifically. The nutrition information that I have plugged into my Carb Manager app is based on the exact ingredients that you will see me using in this video. If you choose to use a different brand of oat fiber or whey protein or a different baking blend, your nutritional information will likely not exactly match up with what I have. If you want to use the Trim Healthy Mama brand, by all means do so. If you want to use a different low carb baking mix that you have either done up yourself or have purchased, be sure to adjust your ingredients or nutrition information based on that. Based on my exact ingredients that I have used, Carb Manager tells me that my bread is 1 gram of net carb per slice, and I get 20 slices out of 1 loaf of bread. Let's get started on making some low carb bread.
My first step is going to be preheating my oven to 350 degrees. For ingredients, I will be using my homemade plain yogurt, my DIY sweet blend, some baking powder, some liquid egg whites, xanthan gum, and then I'm going to also use my homemade baking blend as a flour substitute, some of this Isopure whey protein isolate, oat fiber, this is kind of a key ingredient here, and some pink salt. I'll be using my largest mixing bowl along with my hand mixer to beat my egg whites into stiff peaks using the xanthan gum as a stabilizer. I like to use my hand mixer because it's the most consistent for me personally. I do have a KitchenAid mixer that has jumped off of more than one counter in the past, so it's not quite as stable and steady as it once was. So using my hand mixer just makes it a little bit simpler for me. If you have a hand blender or an immersion blender that has a whisk attachment, you can certainly use that. If you want to just hand whisk it, you can also do that. But the goal here is to create very stiff peaks with the egg whites and the xanthan gum. So I have 2 cups of egg whites and 1 teaspoon of xanthan gum, and I'm going to just whisk this until it's stiff peaks. Let me say it again. It needs to be stiff peaks. Good grief. All right, it takes about 3 minutes using my hand mixer, and it takes about 5 minutes if I'm doing this with my immersion blender and the whisk attachment to that particular blender. I will have a link in my description box to not only the ingredients that I used, but also to a printable recipe card that you can find on my website for this recipe. With those egg whites now beat into a light fluffy meringue, I'm going to add the rest of my ingredients, starting with my homemade Greek yogurt. I'm using 1 1/4 cups of my homemade Greek yogurt. And then I'm going to add in 1/2 cup of this Isopure whey protein. I really like it because it's 0 carbs, not net carbs, just flat out 0 carbs. Then I'm going to be using 1/2 cup of my homemade baking blend that I do have a video on. And then I'm going to use 1 teaspoon of my sweet blend and a 1/2 teaspoon of some salt, and then 1 tablespoon of baking powder. And the key to all of this is this oat fiber. This Life Source oat fiber has been the best one that I have found. I've tried lots of them on Amazon. I have tried the Trim Healthy Mama one. This Life Source one is very consistent. It doesn't have a cardboard flavor to it. It's really good. I use 1 cup of that oat fiber, and then using the standard beaters on my hand mixer, I'm just going to beat this all together. I want to make sure that there's no like dry chunks of powder left to explode in your mouth whenever this is fully baked. And I'm using the USA pan. It's a Pullman style pan from Amazon. It's really handy. This is the 13-inch pan, and I use parchment paper to line it, and I do not coat this with any kind of cooking spray or oil or butter or anything. I find that the bread will rise up and grab onto the sides of this parchment paper to help it hold its shape really, really well. Once I get my bread all smoothed out on top, I'm going to pop it into the oven, and we're going to start with 20 minutes on the timer. And now that that first timer has gone off, you can see that it has risen really nicely. I'm going to go ahead and rotate my pan 180 degrees just so that I can get as even of a bake on this bread as possible. Reset that timer for 20 minutes and check it at the end. Look at that. It's looking really nice. Not quite finished just yet. There's still some uncooked parts, so we're going to let it go. I usually set my timer for 20 minutes, but I can smell it about 10 minutes in. Here I am checking it. It's been in the oven for a total of 56 minutes at this point. The top is nice and golden. The inside is fully cooked, and I'm ready to pull this out of the oven. Using the parchment paper makes it a breeze to pop out of my pan, and I like to leave it on its side to cool for about 5 or 10 minutes. And then I like to flip it over so that it can cool on the other side. I like to constantly be fussing with this as it's trying to cool completely to make sure that I don't have any weird cave-in spots. But because I used oat fiber as my main quote-unquote flour ingredient, it tends to hold its structure really, really well. And as you can see on my parchment there, none of it stuck to the parchment. So not greasing the parchment is perfectly fine. And here we are. I've let this bread cool 100%. And as you can see, it's got lovely little holes as if it was a yeast type bread. It's very soft. It's beautifully colored on the outside with that crust, and the interior is really nice and consistent and soft.
I have 1 slice of my low-carb bread, untoasted, unbuttered, and then I have some that is toasted and unbuttered. So I'm just going to take a bite. Okay, I really like it without it being toasted. It's definitely not dry. It's got a good moisture content to it without feeling super wet. The crust is nice and chewy. However, whenever I make sandwiches with the untoasted bread, they tend to fall apart. So what I prefer to do is actually toast my bread, whether that's toasting it in my skillet to make an actual like grilled cheese sandwich or something along those lines, or toasting this in my air fryer. We don't actually have a toaster anymore. We just use the air fryer, 1 less appliance, and it works beautifully. So toasted definitely dries it out a bit and gives it a sturdier structure. The inside of the bread is still very soft and not dried out like a crouton would be. The outside has a nice crisp to it, but ultimately I don't just make bread to eat just bread. I bake bread to be able to use it as a vehicle for other things like butter. And that's where the magic lies with this bread. It doesn't have a lot of taste. It's like slightly got a little bit of an undertone of sweetness like you would get from a yeast bread. A tiny touch of saltiness, but because there's so little salt in it, it doesn't come across as super salty. But overall, an excellent vehicle for butter, peanut butter that you make, any kind of keto jellies or sugar-free jellies. Perfect for grilled cheese. I'm gonna try some butter on the untoasted bread. That's good right there. I like that very much. Use up this butter because we don't want to waste the butter. So there you have it. This is my low carb bread that was inspired by the Trim Healthy Mama wonderful white blender bread, but it's taken a deviation, and it's definitely one that works out time and time again for me, and we love to have this bread on hand. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you are interested in hanging around and subscribing for more recipes and for some What I Eat in a Day videos, I would love for you to do that. I hope to see you in my next video.